The most dangerous mob mistress in Chicago, she slept with 7 capos and burned their empires in one night. On the morning of November 3, 1968, federal agents executing a coordinated raid across 7 properties in Chicago discovered something that would rewrite the Bureau's understanding of organized crime in America. In a safety deposit box registered to a shell corporation at First National Bank, they found a single leather-bound ledger. The pages were filled with entries in a woman's handwriting, dates, names, account numbers, and beside each entry, a single word written in red ink: collected. The ledger documented 18 months of systematic financial extraction from the highest ranks of the Chicago outfit. Every transaction was signed with the same initial, V. In a penthouse apartment on Lakeshore Drive, they found photographs. 7 men, each a capo in the outfit's hierarchy, each photographed in moments of vulnerability, asleep, undressed, unguarded. On the back of each photograph, written in the same elegant script, insurance. The apartment had been abandoned for exactly 12 hours. The champagne in the ice bucket was still cold. A single red silk scarf lay draped across the back of a chair. The woman who had lived there had vanished as completely as if she had never existed. In the vault of the outfit's primary money laundering operation, a construction company on the South Side, agents found the company's books had been gutted. 18 months of financial records, gone. What remained was a single page, taped to the inside of the empty safe. On it, an address in Zurich and a handwritten note. Gentlemen, thank you for your generosity. The funds have been relocated to a more appreciative institution. Regards, V. By the time the sun set that evening, 7 capos were under federal indictment. Their empires, built over decades, protected by blood oaths and the machinery of corruption, had collapsed in a single coordinated strike. The woman they had all known as Vivian Castellano had disappeared with an estimated $47 million, leaving behind only the evidence that would destroy them. This is not a story about a con artist who seduced powerful men for money. This is a story about a woman who understood that in a world built on loyalty, the greatest power belongs to the one who owes nothing to anyone. This is a story about how desire makes men predictable, how secrets become currency, and how an entire criminal empire can be dismantled not with violence, but with precision, patience, and the willingness to become exactly what powerful men want to see. This is the story of how Vivian Castellano, a woman whose real name no one ever learned, turned the Chicago outfit's own code of silence into a weapon and walked away with everything. Before we continue this story, make sure to hit that subscribe button and tell me where you're listening from. Which city? Which state? I want to know who's out there following these cases with me. To understand how one woman could infiltrate and destroy 7 criminal empires simultaneously, we must go back to a February evening in 1967, to a restaurant called Giancana's on Rush Street, where a woman no one had ever seen before walked through the door and changed everything. She arrived alone, which was the first thing people noticed. Women didn't walk into Giancana's alone. It was a place where power was brokered over veal piccata and bourbon, where the tables in the back were reserved for men whose names appeared in FBI surveillance logs, where the maitre d' knew which conversations to forget. She wore a black dress that suggested wealth without declaring it, pearls that looked inherited, and she carried herself with the kind of confidence that made the room pause. The maitre d' approached her with the polite firmness reserved for people who had wandered into the wrong establishment. She smiled at him and said, "I'm meeting Mr. DeLuca. He's expecting me." Anthony DeLuca was not expecting anyone. He was sitting at his usual table in the back, conducting business with two associates, when the maitre d' appeared with a woman who looked like she belonged in a gallery opening, not a mob restaurant. DeLuca, a capo who controlled the outfit's interests in the Teamsters and the construction unions, was a man who prided himself on never being surprised. He looked at the woman, looked at his associates, and made a decision that would eventually cost him everything. "It's fine," he told the maitre d'. "The lady can join us." She sat down, ordered a martini with the precision of someone who knew exactly what she wanted, and waited. DeLuca's associates excused themselves. When they were alone, she leaned forward slightly and said, "Mr. DeLuca, I have a proposition that I think will interest you. I represent a group of investors who are looking to move a substantial amount of capital through legitimate construction projects. We understand you have connections that could facilitate this kind of arrangement." What followed was a conversation that lasted 2 hours. She spoke the language of finance with the fluency of someone who had spent years in boardrooms. She knew the tax codes, the shell corporation structures, the offshore mechanisms. She knew which banks asked questions and which ones didn't. She knew the names of the right lawyers, the right accountants, the right politicians. And she knew, with perfect precision, exactly how much to reveal and how much to withhold. By the time she left that night, DeLuca had agreed to a meeting with her investors. She had given him a business card with a phone number and a name: Vivian Castellano. The card was printed on heavy stock with embossed lettering. It looked expensive. It looked real. The phone number led to an answering service. The investors never materialized, but Vivian Castellano called DeLuca 3 days later and apologized. The deal had fallen through, she explained. The investors had gotten cold feet. She sounded genuinely disappointed. She asked if she could buy him dinner to apologize for wasting his time. DeLuca said yes. This was the pattern. This was how it began. Not with seduction, but with business. Not with promises of pleasure, but with the language of profit. She understood that men like DeLuca didn't trust women who offered themselves too easily. They trusted women who understood their world, who spoke their language, who seemed to want the same things they wanted: money, power, control. The dinner was at the Cape Cod Room. She wore navy blue and asked intelligent questions about his business. She listened when he talked. She laughed at his jokes, but not too much. She was interested, but not eager. She was available, but not desperate. And when the evening ended, she shook his hand, thanked him for his time, and left alone. DeLuca called her 2 days later. Over the next 3 months, Vivian Castellano became a fixture in Anthony DeLuca's life. They had dinner twice a week. She met him at his office. She attended a charity gala as his guest. She was seen with him at the theater, at boxing matches, at private clubs where the city's power brokers gathered. She was beautiful, intelligent, and discreet. She never asked about his business. She never pressed for commitment. She was, in every way, the perfect companion for a man who needed to keep his private life separate from his professional obligations. And then, one night in May, she invited him to her apartment. The apartment was on the 40th floor of a building on Lakeshore Drive, with views of the city that stretched to the horizon. It was furnished with the kind of understated elegance that suggested old money, art that looked museum quality, furniture that looked inherited, books that looked read. There was champagne chilling and Sinatra playing softly on the stereo. She had changed into something more comfortable. She poured him a drink and sat beside him on the sofa and let the evening unfold with the inevitability of something that had always been meant to happen. What DeLuca didn't know was that the apartment was rented under a false name. The art was purchased at estate sales. The books were props. The champagne was expensive because expensive champagne was what men like DeLuca expected. And hidden in the bedroom, behind a false panel in the closet, was a camera with a telephoto lens and a tape recorder with a voice-activated switch. The next morning, while DeLuca slept, Vivian Castellano photographed him. She photographed the birthmark on his left shoulder. She photographed the scar from a knife wound on his ribs. She photographed him in a state of absolute vulnerability. And then she made coffee and woke him gently and sent him home with a kiss that promised this was the beginning of something. That afternoon, she developed the photographs in a darkroom she had rented under another false name. She filed them in a folder labeled with DeLuca's name. She made copies. She stored the negatives in a safety deposit box at a bank where she was known as Mrs. Victoria Castellano, widow, independently wealthy, interested in long-term investments. And then she went to dinner at a restaurant called the Pump Room, where she had arranged to accidentally encounter a man named Vincent Torrio. Vincent Torrio was a capo who controlled the outfit's gambling operations on the North Side. He was 42, divorced, and known for his taste in younger women. He was also known for his paranoia, his violent temper, and his absolute loyalty to the outfit's code of silence. He was, by all accounts, one of the most dangerous men in Chicago. Vivian Castellano bumped into him at the bar. She apologized. She smiled. She ordered a drink. She mentioned that she was new to Chicago, that she was in finance, that she was looking for investment opportunities. She asked if he knew anyone who might be interested in discussing commercial real estate development. Torrio, who had spent the last hour watching her from across the room, said he might know some people. The pattern repeated. Dinner, conversation, business talk that never quite materialized into actual business. A second dinner, a third, an invitation to a private club, an introduction to his world. And then, 6 weeks after their first meeting, an invitation to her apartment on Lakeshore Drive, the apartment where Anthony DeLuca had been photographed 6 weeks earlier, the apartment where Vincent Torrio would be photographed that night. This was the architecture of her operation. This was the system. She moved through the outfit's hierarchy like a ghost, visible only when she chose to be seen, leaving no trace except the evidence she wanted to leave. She understood that men like DeLuca and Torrio lived in a world where trust was currency and secrets were leverage. She understood that they were surrounded by people who wanted something from them: money, protection, advancement. She understood that the rarest thing in their world was a woman who seemed to want nothing except their company. And so she gave them exactly that. She was never demanding. She never asked questions about their business. She never requested money or gifts. She paid for her own dinners. She maintained her own apartment. She had her own life, her own interests, her own independence. She was, in every visible way, exactly what they wanted: a woman who enhanced their status without threatening their security. What they didn't see was the ledger she kept in a locked drawer. What they didn't see was the safety deposit box where she stored the photographs, the recordings, the documentation of every moment of vulnerability. What they didn't see was the pattern she was building, the web she was weaving, the trap she was constructing with the patience of someone who understood that power is not taken in a single violent act, but accumulated in small, careful increments over time. By December of 1967, Vivian Castellano was involved with 4 capos simultaneously: Anthony DeLuca, who controlled construction and the Teamsters; Vincent Torrio, who controlled gambling; James Battaglia, who controlled the South Side policy rackets; and Michael Greco, who controlled the outfit's interests in the restaurant and hotel unions. None of them knew about the others. She scheduled her time with the precision of a corporate executive, maintaining separate phone lines, separate routines, separate versions of herself for each man. To DeLuca, she was interested in real estate and classical music. To Torrio, she was fascinated by horse racing and jazz. To Battaglia, she shared his interest in Italian cinema and fine wine. To Greco, she loved theater and modern art. She never made mistakes. She never confused details. She never let one relationship bleed into another. She maintained absolute operational security, moving through their lives like a professional intelligence operative, which is exactly what she was, though not for any government agency. She was working for herself, building an asset portfolio that would eventually be worth more than any of them could imagine. The breakthrough came in January of 1968, when she gained access to something that changed the entire scope of her operation. Michael Greco, the capo who controlled the hotel and restaurant unions, had a problem. His bookkeeper had died suddenly, a heart attack, though there were whispers it had been helped along, and he needed someone he could trust to manage his financial records. The outfit's money laundering operations were complex, involving dozens of shell corporations, offshore accounts, and legitimate businesses that served as fronts. The bookkeeper had been one of the few people who understood the entire system. Greco was desperate. He needed someone smart, discreet, and trustworthy. Someone who understood finance and could keep secrets. Vivian Castellano mentioned casually over dinner one night that she had worked in accounting before moving to Chicago. She had managed books for several businesses. She understood corporate structures, tax law, offshore banking. She would be happy to help if he needed someone temporarily, just until he found a permanent replacement. Greco, who had been sleeping with her for 2 months, and who trusted her in the way men trust women they believe they've conquered, said yes. She started work the following Monday. She was given an office in the back of a restaurant supply company that served as one of Greco's fronts. She was given access to the ledgers, the account numbers, the corporate structures. She was given the keys to the kingdom, and she began, methodically and carefully, to copy everything. She worked late into the night, photographing pages of ledgers with a miniature camera she had purchased from a surveillance equipment supplier. She memorized account numbers, routing codes, the names of lawyers and accountants who facilitated the money movement. She traced the flow of cash from street-level operations through a maze of shell corporations and legitimate businesses, watching it transform from dirty money into clean assets. She discovered that the outfit's financial operations were far more sophisticated than anyone outside the organization understood. They weren't just running numbers and skimming from casinos. They were operating a parallel banking system, moving hundreds of millions of dollars through legitimate financial institutions, using techniques that would have impressed any corporate CFO. And she discovered something else. The system was vulnerable. It was complex, yes, but complexity created points of failure. The money moved through choke points, specific accounts, specific banks, specific individuals who controlled access. If someone understood the system well enough, if someone had the right access at the right time, the entire operation could be compromised. Vivian Castellano understood the system, and she was about to get the access she needed. In March of 1968, she began a relationship with a man named Robert Santoro. Santoro was different from the other capos. He was the outfit's primary liaison with the legitimate banking system, the man who maintained relationships with bank executives and financial regulators. He was educated, sophisticated, and paranoid to a degree that bordered on pathological. He trusted no one. He kept multiple sets of books. He maintained backup systems for his backup systems. Getting close to Santoro required a different approach. He wasn't interested in beautiful women who appeared at restaurants. He didn't go to clubs or attend social events. He lived quietly in a townhouse in Lincoln Park, drove a modest car, and presented himself to the world as a successful investment advisor. Vivian Castellano met him at a lecture on international finance at the University of Chicago. She asked an intelligent question during the Q&A session. She introduced herself afterward as a financial analyst interested in emerging markets. She mentioned that she was new to the city and looking for professional networking opportunities. They had coffee. They discussed currency markets and capital flows. She demonstrated knowledge that impressed him. She was careful, precise, and showed no interest in his personal life. She was, in every way, a professional colleague. It took 3 months before he invited her to dinner. It took another month before he invited her to his home. And it took another month after that before she gained access to the one thing she had been working toward since the beginning: the master ledger. The master ledger was kept in a safe in Santoro's study. It documented every major financial transaction the outfit had conducted over the past 5 years. It listed account numbers, transfer dates, amounts, and the names of the individuals who had authorized each movement of money. It was, effectively, a complete map of the outfit's financial empire. Santoro showed it to her one night after they had made love, after he had drunk enough wine to lower his guard, after she had asked exactly the right question about a complex transaction he had mentioned in passing. He wanted to impress her. He wanted to show her the scope of what he managed, the complexity of the system he had built. She looked at the ledger with the appropriate level of awe. She asked intelligent questions. She praised his sophistication, and she memorized every detail she could absorb in the 20 minutes he allowed her to examine it. The next day, she began planning the extraction. By April of 1968, Vivian Castellano had relationships with 7 capos. In addition to De Luca, Torrio, Battaglia, Greco, and Santoro, she had cultivated connections with Frank Lombardo, who controlled the outfit's loan sharking operations, and Thomas Russo, who managed their interests in the waste management and trucking industries. 7 men, 7 separate relationships, 7 different versions of herself, 7 sets of secrets, photographs, recordings, and financial intelligence. She had spent 18 months building this network, 18 months of careful performance, of maintaining separate identities, of never making a mistake that would reveal the pattern. 18 months of accumulating leverage, documentation, and access. And now she was ready to execute. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. She would extract the money first, then deliver the evidence to the FBI, then disappear before anyone understood what had happened. The timing had to be perfect. The execution had to be simultaneous. If any of the 7 men discovered what was happening before the others were compromised, the entire operation would collapse. She began in May, making small transfers from accounts she had access to through her work with Greco. Nothing large enough to trigger immediate attention. A few $1,000s here, 10,000 there moved, through a series of shell corporations she had established over the previous year. The money flowed through banks in New York, Miami, and Los Angeles before landing in accounts in Zurich that were registered to corporations with names that sounded legitimate, but existed only on paper. She increased the volume gradually. By June, she was moving $50,000 a week. By July, $100,000. The money came from different sources: construction kickbacks, gambling proceeds, loan sharking interest, union pension funds. She was careful to take only from accounts that had high enough volume that the missing funds wouldn't be immediately noticed. She used her access to Santoro's systems to cover her tracks, creating false entries in ledgers, generating paperwork that made the transfers look legitimate. She forged signatures. She created fake invoices. She built an entire architecture of deception that would take months to unravel. And while she was extracting the money, she was also preparing the evidence that would destroy them. She compiled the photographs into dossiers, one for each capo. She transcribed the recordings, creating typed transcripts with timestamps and context. She documented the financial crimes she had witnessed, creating detailed reports that explained the money laundering systems, listed the account numbers, identified the corrupt officials who facilitated the operations. She organized everything into 7 folders, each one containing enough evidence to secure a federal indictment. She made copies. She stored the originals in safety deposit boxes at 3 different banks. She prepared packages for delivery to the FBI, complete with cover letters explaining what the evidence documented and how it had been obtained. And then, in October of 1968, she made her final moves. She scheduled a dinner with each of the 7 capos for the same week. Monday, De Luca. Tuesday, Torrio. Wednesday, Battaglia. Thursday, Greco. Friday, Santoro. Saturday, Lombardo. Sunday, Russo. Each dinner was at a different restaurant. Each conversation was carefully calibrated. She was warm, but slightly distant. She mentioned that she might need to travel for work. She suggested they should take a break, give each other some space. She was gentle, apologetic, and firm. None of them suspected anything. Why would they? She had been the perfect companion for 18 months. She had never asked for anything. She had never caused problems. She was simply a woman who had decided, for her own reasons, that it was time to move on. On Monday, October 28th, she had her final dinner with Anthony De Luca. She wore the same black dress she had worn the first night they met. She ordered the same martini. She smiled at him across the table and said, "Anthony, you've been wonderful to me. I want you to know that." He reached across the table and took her hand. "You're not saying goodbye, are you?" "I'm saying thank you," she said. She kissed him on the cheek when they parted. She watched him walk to his car, and then she went home to her apartment on Lakeshore Drive and began the final phase of the operation. Over the next 48 hours, she executed the largest coordinated financial extraction in the history of organized crime in America. Using the access codes and account information she had accumulated over 18 months, she initiated wire transfers from 47 different accounts. The money moved through a network of shell corporations and correspondent banks, flowing from Chicago to New York to London to Zurich in a cascade of transactions that would take federal investigators years to fully trace. The total amount extracted, $47 million. At the same time, she delivered the evidence packages to the FBI. She didn't mail them. She didn't drop them off at a field office. She arranged for a courier service to deliver them simultaneously to 7 different FBI agents who were known to be investigating organized crime in Chicago. Each package arrived at exactly 9 a.m. on November 3, 1968. By 10 a.m., federal agents were mobilizing for coordinated raids. By noon, the raids were underway. By 6 p.m., 7 capos were in federal custody, and the Chicago outfit's financial operations had been gutted, and Vivian Castellano was gone. The FBI's investigation into her identity revealed almost nothing. The name Vivian Castellano was false. The social security number she had used belonged to a woman who had died in 1952. The apartment on Lakeshore Drive had been rented under a corporate name that led to a shell company that led to a dead end. The bank accounts she had used for her legitimate expenses were empty. The phone numbers disconnected. The business cards, the references, the entire elaborate identity she had constructed, all of it evaporated like smoke. Investigators interviewed the 7 capos, looking for information about who she really was. The interviews were exercises in humiliation. Each man had believed he was special, that his relationship with her was unique. Each man discovered he had been one of 7. Each man realized he had been played with a level of sophistication that made their own criminal operations look amateurish by comparison. Anthony DeLuca, when shown the photographs and told about the other 6 men, said only, "She never asked me for anything. Not once. I don't understand." Vincent Torrio refused to speak about her at all. He took a plea deal and entered federal prison without ever saying her name. Robert Santoro, the most paranoid and careful of them all, the man who trusted no one, who maintained backup systems for his backup systems, sat in the interrogation room and laughed. It was a hollow, broken sound. "She knew everything," he said. "She knew the entire system. She knew it better than I did. How is that possible?" The FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit studied the case for months. They concluded that Vivian Castellano, whoever she really was, had operated with a level of planning and discipline that suggested professional training. The precision of her timing, the sophistication of her financial operations, the psychological manipulation of 7 different targets simultaneously, it all pointed to someone with intelligence or military background. But no intelligence agency claimed her. No military records matched her description. No law enforcement database contained her fingerprints or her DNA. She had moved through the world for 18 months, interacting with hundreds of people, leaving behind photographs and recordings and documents, and yet she had left no trace of her actual identity. The money, too, vanished. The FBI traced the wire transfers through the network of shell corporations and correspondent banks, following the trail from Chicago to Zurich. The Swiss accounts had been emptied within hours of the funds arriving. The money had been converted to bearer bonds and physical gold, then moved again through channels that went cold in Liechtenstein. $47 million gone. 7 criminal empires destroyed. 1 woman disappeared. In the years that followed, there were occasional reported sightings. A woman matching her description was seen in Paris in 1970, dining alone at a restaurant near the Louvre. Another sighting in Buenos Aires in 1972, at a gallery opening. A third in Hong Kong in 1975, boarding a private yacht. None of the sightings were confirmed. None led anywhere. She had become a ghost story, a legend whispered about in federal offices and prison yards, a cautionary tale about the dangers of underestimating women, of confusing desire with loyalty, of believing that power makes you invulnerable. The Chicago outfit never recovered from the damage she inflicted. The 7 capos all went to prison. The financial networks they had built over decades were dismantled. The organization fractured into competing factions. Within 5 years, the outfit's power in Chicago had diminished to a shadow of what it had been. And somewhere in the world, a woman who had once called herself Vivian Castellano was living a life that no one could trace, funded by $47 million that had been extracted from men who had believed they were the ones in control. The FBI kept the case file open for 20 years. They interviewed hundreds of witnesses. They followed thousands of leads. They consulted with intelligence agencies around the world. They never found her. They never even discovered her real name. In 1988, the case was officially closed. The final report concluded that Vivian Castellano had been a sophisticated criminal operator who successfully executed a complex, long-term infiltration and extraction operation against multiple targets in the Chicago organized crime hierarchy. The report noted that her true identity remained unknown and that the likelihood of apprehension after 20 years was negligible. The report's final paragraph read, "Subject demonstrated an exceptional understanding of human psychology, financial systems, and operational security. The precision and patience required to maintain 7 simultaneous relationships while conducting systematic financial extraction suggests professional-level training and discipline. This case represents one of the most successful individual operations against organized crime in Bureau history, despite the fact that the operator was working for personal gain rather than law enforcement objectives." What the report didn't say, what couldn't be quantified in official language, was what the case revealed about the nature of power itself. The 7 Capos had built their empires on violence, intimidation, and the code of silence. They had controlled territories, corrupted officials, and operated with impunity for decades. They had believed themselves untouchable, and they had been destroyed by a woman who never raised her voice, never made a threat, never resorted to violence. She had simply understood that in a world built on loyalty and fear, the greatest power belongs to the one who owes nothing to anyone. She had understood that secrets are currency, that desire makes men predictable, and that patience is the ultimate weapon. She had understood that the men who controlled Chicago's criminal underworld were, in the end, just men. And men, no matter how powerful, are vulnerable in the moments when they believe they are safe. The photographs she left behind, 7 men, asleep, unguarded, trusting, became evidence in federal trials. But they were also something else. They were proof of a simple truth that the men had forgotten in their accumulation of power. That vulnerability is not weakness unless someone chooses to exploit it, and that trust is not safety unless it is deserved. Vivian Castellano had given them exactly what they wanted. She had been beautiful, intelligent, discreet. She had enhanced their status without threatening their security. She had asked for nothing. She had been, in every visible way, the perfect companion. And in being perfect, she had been invisible. In asking for nothing, she had been trusted. In enhancing their status, she had gained access to everything. The question that haunted the investigators, the question that appeared in the margins of the case file, the question that was asked in interrogation rooms and prison cells and federal offices, was the simplest and most unanswerable of all. Who was she really? Some believed she was a professional thief who had studied the outfit for years before executing her plan. Others thought she might have been a former intelligence operative, someone trained in psychological manipulation and financial crimes. A few speculated she might have been motivated by revenge, that one of the 7 men had wronged her or someone she loved, and the money was secondary to the destruction. But the truth, if there was a truth, remained locked behind the false names and shell corporations and empty apartments. The woman who had called herself Vivian Castellano had constructed an identity so thoroughly that when she discarded it, nothing remained. No photographs except the ones she had taken of others. No fingerprints except the ones she had left deliberately. No past, no future, no trace. She had moved through their world like a ghost, visible only when she chose to be seen, leaving behind only the evidence of what she had taken and the wreckage of what she had destroyed. In the end, perhaps that was the point. Perhaps the entire operation was designed not just to extract money, but to prove something. To demonstrate that power is an illusion, that control is temporary, that the men who believed themselves masters of their world were just as vulnerable as anyone else. Or perhaps she simply saw an opportunity and took it. Perhaps there was no deeper meaning, no grand statement, no philosophical point. Perhaps she was just a woman who understood how systems worked and how men thought, and how to turn both to her advantage. The FBI's behavioral analysts wrote in their final assessment, "Subject's motivations remain unclear. Financial gain appears to be primary objective, but the sophistication of the operation and the precision of the execution suggest possible secondary motivations including revenge, ideological opposition to organized crime, or psychological satisfaction derived from the manipulation and destruction of powerful targets." What they couldn't write, what couldn't be included in an official report, was the possibility that she had done it simply because she could. Because she had seen 7 men who believed themselves untouchable and had decided to prove them wrong. Because she had understood that in a world where power was measured in violence and fear, the ultimate power was the ability to walk away with everything while leaving nothing behind but questions. The last confirmed sighting of anyone matching her description was in 1982 in a small town on the coast of Portugal. A woman in her 50s, elegant, well-dressed, living quietly in a villa overlooking the Atlantic. She spoke Portuguese with a slight accent. She paid her bills in cash. She had no visitors. She spent her days reading, walking on the beach, and painting watercolors of the sea. A retired FBI agent vacationing in the area thought he recognized her. He watched her for 3 days, trying to be certain. On the 4th day, he approached her at a cafe and asked, in English, if her name was Vivian Castellano. She looked at him with eyes that revealed nothing. She smiled politely and said, in Portuguese, that he must have mistaken her for someone else. Her name was Maria. She had lived in this town for 10 years. She was a widow. She had no idea who Vivian Castellano was. The agent apologized. He walked away. He filed a report when he returned to the States, but by the time anyone followed up, the woman had moved. The villa was empty. The neighbors said she had mentioned something about visiting family in Brazil. No one knew where she had gone. The agent in his report wrote, "Subject, if it was indeed her, showed no recognition, no fear, no reaction of any kind. Either I was mistaken, or she has become someone else so completely that the name Vivian Castellano means nothing to her anymore." Maybe that was the final truth. Maybe she hadn't just discarded an identity. Maybe she had discarded the entire person she had been during those 18 months in Chicago. Maybe Vivian Castellano had been a role she played, a character she inhabited, and when the performance was over, she had simply walked off stage and become someone else entirely. Or maybe she had always been no one. Maybe there had never been a real person beneath the performance. Maybe she was just a collection of carefully constructed identities, each one designed for a specific purpose, each one discarded when it was no longer useful. The 7 Capos, in their prison cells, had years to think about what had happened to them. Some of them came to believe she had been sent by a rival family, that the entire operation had been a sophisticated hit designed to look like a theft. Others convinced themselves she had been working for the FBI all along, that the whole thing had been an elaborate sting operation. But a few of them, the ones who had known her best, who had spent the most time with her, who had believed they understood her, came to a different conclusion. They came to believe that she had been exactly what she appeared to be, a woman who saw an opportunity and took it. A woman who understood that in a world built on violence and loyalty, the greatest advantage belonged to the one who owed nothing to anyone. Anthony DeLuca, in a letter written from federal prison in 1975, 7 years after his arrest, wrote to a friend, "I've had a long time to think about what happened. I've replayed every conversation, every dinner, every moment we spent together. And I still can't find the lie. She never promised me anything. She never asked for anything. She never pretended to be anything other than what she was. The mistake wasn't hers. The mistake was mine. I saw what I wanted to see. I believed what I wanted to believe. And she let me. That might be the closest anyone ever came to understanding what had really happened. The 7 Capos had been destroyed not by deception, but by their own assumptions. They had believed that a woman who was beautiful and intelligent and interested in them must want something from them. They had believed that their power made them attractive, that their status made them desirable, that their wealth made them irresistible. And Vivian Castellano had understood that belief was the vulnerability. She had given them exactly what they expected, a woman who enhanced their status, who asked for nothing, who seemed content to exist in the margins of their powerful lives, and in giving them what they expected, she had become invisible. In asking for nothing, she had been trusted with everything. The $47 million she took was significant, but it wasn't the real prize. The real prize was the proof that she could do it, that she could walk into the most dangerous criminal organization in America, seduce 7 of its most powerful men, extract their secrets and their money, and walk away without leaving a trace. The real prize was the knowledge that power is an illusion, that control is temporary, and that the people who believe themselves untouchable are the most vulnerable of all. In the decades since the case was closed, it has become a legend in law enforcement circles. FBI agents study it in training courses on organized crime and financial investigations. It appears in textbooks on criminal psychology and white-collar crime. It has been the subject of academic papers, true crime documentaries, and countless bar conversations among cops and criminals alike. But the legend has obscured the reality. The story has been simplified, romanticized, turned into a parable about female empowerment or criminal genius or the downfall of the mob. The complexity has been lost. The patience, the discipline, the 18 months of careful performance, all of it has been compressed into a simple narrative. Woman seduces mobsters, steals their money, disappears. The truth was more complicated. The truth was that Vivian Castellano, whoever she really was, had understood something fundamental about human nature. She had understood that people see what they expect to see, that desire makes men predictable, and that the greatest con is the one where the mark never realizes they've been conned at all. The 7 Capos went to prison believing they had been betrayed. But betrayal implies a relationship, implies trust, implies that something real was broken. What Vivian Castellano had done was something different. She had given them a performance so perfect that they had believed it was real. And when the performance ended, they were left with nothing but the evidence of their own gullibility. The question that remains, the question that will never be answered, is whether she felt anything at all. Whether, in those 18 months, in those hundreds of hours spent with 7 different men, there were moments when the performance slipped, moments when she felt something real, moments when she wondered if she could simply stop, choose one of them, build a life that wasn't based on deception. The evidence suggests she never wavered. The precision of the operation, the perfection of the timing, the completeness of her disappearance. All of it points to someone who never lost sight of the objective. Someone who understood that sentiment was a liability, that attachment was a weakness, that the only way to execute the plan was to never let it become real. But the evidence can't tell us what she thought in the quiet moments, what she felt when Anthony DeLuca took her hand across the dinner table. What she thought when Robert Santoro showed her the master ledger, trusting her with the secrets that would destroy him. What she felt when she walked out of her apartment on Lakeshore Drive for the last time, leaving behind the champagne and the photographs and the life she had built. Maybe she felt nothing. Maybe she was exactly what the FBI's behavioral analysts suggested. A professional operator who executed a complex plan with perfect discipline. Maybe sentiment never entered into it. Maybe she looked at those 7 men and saw only targets, marks, means to an end. Or maybe she felt everything. Maybe every dinner was an exercise in suppressing guilt. Maybe every moment of intimacy was a battle against the urge to tell the truth. Maybe the reason she disappeared so completely was because she couldn't bear to be reminded of what she had done. We'll never know. That's the final truth of the story. We'll never know who she really was, what she really felt, or why she really did it. All we have is the evidence she left behind. The photographs, the ledgers, the empty accounts, the 7 men in prison, and the $47 million that vanished into the offshore banking system like water into sand. The case file, gathering dust in a federal archive, contains one final document. It's a letter that arrived at FBI headquarters in Chicago in 1990, 22 years after the raids. The envelope had no return address. The postmark was smudged and illegible. The letter was typed on plain white paper with no identifying marks. It read, "Gentlemen, I hope this letter finds you well. I wanted to thank you for your diligent work on the Castellano case. I've followed the coverage over the years with great interest. I was particularly impressed by the behavioral analysis report. The analysts were correct about many things, though not everything. I want you to know that I never intended to cause harm to anyone except the 7 men who deserved it. The money they lost was money they had stolen from others. The secrets I exposed were crimes they had committed. I simply accelerated justice. I hope you can understand that. I also want you to know that I'm done. I've lived quietly for 20 years. I've harmed no one. I've broken no laws. I've simply existed, peacefully, far from the life I left behind. This letter is my final communication. You won't hear from me again. I wish you all the best. Regards, V." The letter was analyzed by forensic experts. The paper was common stock available in thousands of stores. The typewriter was a standard model from the 1980s. The envelope had been handled by so many postal workers that any useful fingerprints were impossible to isolate. The postmark analysis was inconclusive. The letter could have been from her, or it could have been from someone who had read about the case and decided to add their own chapter to the legend. There was no way to know. The FBI added the letter to the case file and closed it again. There was nothing to investigate. No crime had been committed. No new evidence had emerged. It was just one more piece of the puzzle that would never be solved. And maybe that's fitting. Maybe some stories aren't meant to have endings. Maybe some questions aren't meant to be answered. Maybe the point of the story isn't what happened, but what it reveals about the people involved. The 7 Capos believed themselves powerful. They believed their violence made them untouchable. Their money made them secure. Their loyalty to the code made them invulnerable. And they were destroyed by a woman who understood that power is an illusion, that security is temporary, and that the code of silence only works when everyone has something to lose. Vivian Castellano had nothing to lose because she had never been real. She was a ghost from the beginning, a performance, a carefully constructed identity designed to exploit the one weakness that powerful men never acknowledge: their need to believe that someone desires them for who they are, rather than what they have. In the end, the story of Vivian Castellano is not a story about crime or theft or revenge. It's a story about belief, about how we construct narratives that make sense of our lives, how we see what we want to see, how we trust what we want to trust. It's a story about how the most dangerous person in the room is not the one who threatens violence, but the one who understands exactly what you want to believe and gives it to you so perfectly that you never question whether it's real. The 7 Capos wanted to believe they were special. They wanted to believe that a beautiful, intelligent woman found them attractive for reasons beyond their power and money. They wanted to believe that they could have both worlds, the violence and loyalty of their criminal lives, and the intimacy and connection of a real relationship. And Vivian Castellano gave them exactly that belief. She made them feel special. She made them feel seen. She made them feel like they could trust her. And then she took everything. The question that haunts the case, the question that appears in the margins of the FBI reports, the question that was whispered in prison yards and federal offices is not, who was she? But how did she do it? How did one woman maintain 7 separate relationships for 18 months without making a single mistake? How did she memorize the details of 7 different lives, 7 different preferences, 7 different versions of herself? How did she suppress whatever guilt or fear or doubt she must have felt and execute the plan with perfect precision? The answer, perhaps, is that she understood something the 7 Capos never did. She understood that consistency is the key to deception, that the way to maintain a lie is not to remember the lie, but to become it, that the most believable performance is the one where the performer forgets they're performing. For 18 months, Vivian Castellano wasn't pretending to be 7 different women. She was 7 different women. Each version was real in the moment it existed. Each conversation was genuine. Each smile was authentic. Each moment of intimacy was true. And when the performance was over, when the money was extracted and the evidence was delivered and the apartment was empty, all 7 versions of herself disappeared. Not because she was running from the truth, but because there was no truth to run from. There was only the performance, and when the performance ended, there was nothing left. That might be the most unsettling part of the story. Not that she deceived 7 powerful men, but that she did it so completely that even she might not have known where the performance ended and reality began. That she might have been so deep in the role that she lost track of who she really was. That the woman who walked away from Chicago in November of 1968 might have been just as much a stranger to herself as she was to everyone else. The FBI's final assessment concluded that Vivian Castellano was a sophisticated criminal operator. But maybe she was something else. Maybe she was an artist. Maybe the entire operation was a performance piece, a demonstration of how completely one person can inhabit multiple identities, how thoroughly reality can be constructed and deconstructed, how easily powerful men can be made to believe whatever they want to believe. Or maybe she was just a thief. Maybe there was no deeper meaning, no artistic statement, no philosophical point. Maybe she saw $47 million and decided to take it. Maybe the sophistication of the operation was simply the result of careful planning and discipline. Maybe she felt nothing, thought nothing, meant nothing beyond the simple desire to get rich and get away. We'll never know. And maybe that's the point. Maybe the story of Vivian Castellano is ultimately a story about the limits of knowledge, about how much we can never know about other people, about how the human capacity for deception is matched only by the human capacity for self-deception. The 7 Capos deceived themselves into believing they were special. Vivian Castellano deceived them into believing she was real, And all of us reading this story, hearing this case, studying this operation, are left with the same question they had. What do we really know about anyone? How much of what we see is real, and how much is performance? How many of the people in our lives are exactly who they appear to be? And how many are playing roles we're too willing to believe? The case of Vivian Castellano forces us to confront an uncomfortable truth, that we are all, to some extent, performing. That we all present different versions of ourselves to different people. That we all maintain secrets, hide vulnerabilities, construct identities that serve our purposes. The difference is that most of us believe our own performances. We convince ourselves that the roles we play are who we really are. We forget that we're performing at all. Vivian Castellano never forgot. That was her advantage. That was her power. She understood that identity is a choice, that reality is a construction, and that the person who controls the narrative controls everything. And in the end, she controlled the narrative so completely that even now, more than 50 years later, we're still trying to figure out what really happened. We're still asking who she was, why she did it, where she went. We're still searching for answers that will probably never come. Maybe that was the plan all along. Maybe the point wasn't just to take the money and disappear. Maybe the point was to leave behind a mystery so complete, so perfect, that it would never be solved. To create a legend that would outlive her, a story that would be told and retold, a question that would never be answered. If that was the plan, it worked. Vivian Castellano has become immortal, not as a person, but as a question. Not as a criminal, but as a ghost. Not as a woman who lived and died, but as a story that will never end. And somewhere in the world, if she's still alive, she might be reading this. She might be listening to this case being discussed, analyzed, dissected. She might be smiling at how close we've come to understanding what she did, and how far we still are from understanding who she was. Or maybe she's forgotten all of it. Maybe she's moved on so completely that the woman who called herself Vivian Castellano is as much a stranger to her now as she is to us. Maybe she's become someone else entirely, living a quiet life, harming no one, remembering nothing. The truth, like the woman herself, remains missing. And maybe that's exactly how she wanted it.